Okay. All right. Welcome back. I am very pleased to be able to introduce our keynote for our afternoon session, Mr. Nick Andersen, Acting Director and Deputy Director of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. So we are so thrilled that he has taken time out of his schedule to be able to support and be here at the Defend the Airport Collaborative. So welcome, Mr. Andersen.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it. Thank you all for taking the time. Thank you for letting me join you for for a little bit. Our work at CISA has continued over the last several years, and certainly over the course of the last year since I've been there, we've really doubled down on our focus on control systems and our OT environment, and sort of the underpinnings of what is it that helps us to safeguard the American way of life. And I think about just thematically the types of things y'all been going through today and the kinds of conversations that I know that you've been having. Our transportation sector is a terrific example of the rapid transformation we've seen over the last couple of decades of modernization and technology integration, where these flying miracle boxes that we strap ourselves into and then take off are essentially just computers with wings. I mean, it's just a miracle of evolution to see the Wright brothers to where we are today, and the types of transportation evolution that we've seen with smaller craft and the availability that that's going to provide to people over the next couple of years, and sort of the democratization of air travel and just how exceedingly cheap it is now, and we see the crushing volume that we experience, and is of course highlighted when we have things like a DHS shutdown. Contact your legislators, make sure it doesn't happen again. But we see that the crush of just impact that has within our economy, and that's just thinking about commercial passenger travel. That's not even thinking about the movement of goods and the underpinnings of the rest of our economy that go into both international good movement and domestic goods movement. So, I mean, it really is a small miracle every single day as we continue to engage in the support that the aviation subsector provides. Oh, y'all cut the thing off. Thank God. I was going to get a migraine standing in front of that light. It really is just a small miracle that continues to play out every single day, and the impact that it has, not just on our economy, but the impact that it has on protecting our nation's defense overall, and air power as a significant component to that, both manned and unmanned moving forward. But it also provides for a tremendous amount of attack surface for our adversaries to take advantage of. Every single day, we continue to see it play out, in particular in our control systems environment. The types of opportunities that were provided for then become the exact risk that our adversaries seek to take advantage of. So CISA, I can't even tell you the exact date, but go on CISA.gov. It'll be right there with all of our other fantastic products we provide. We provided some highlights of Iranian threat actor activity over the last couple of months, targeting things like PLCs that were open and available on the internet, and that low-hanging fruit opportunity it provides for our adversaries to be able to seek to not just target technical infrastructure for the sake of targeting technical infrastructure. They are seeking to have a significant psychological impact on the American public, on our way of life, to introduce doubt, and so seeds of fear in our economy. They are hoping to fundamentally change the risk calculus of, can we trust these things? Can we trust that clean drinking water is going to come out of the tap when we need it? Can we trust that we're going to be able to come into a room and flip the lights on? Can we trust that the projector is going to work for the 50-slide deck presentation that I'm going to give you all in a few minutes? It's there will be no slides. Oh yeah, it definitely is. I hate slides. That'll be the one part of the technology ecosystem that I allow to fall flat, and we will not rescue them whatsoever. But the impact and the opportunity that we then have as operators in this space, either as critical infrastructure owner operators, as cyber defenders, as network defenders, as people that are seeking to build better, more secure, products through the design cycle, the opportunity we have is a tremendous burden as well. We are all gifted the opportunity to work in this space, but it is also just a tremendous burden on all of us. We know the worst that can happen. So at this point, we have to really reframe our thinking to be, are we doing the most that we can do to be able to, with a clear conscience, look our families in the eye and say, I knew what could have happened, and I did absolutely everything within my power in order to secure us for the future. You know, my analogy that I use with our team, which is perhaps more appropriate for a defend the airport crowd and us thinking about aviation and that subsector in particular, is I don't want CISA employees. I don't want my friends within the interagency. I don't want my friends within industry to have to wake up on a bad day and reflect and think this is what it felt like to be a TSA employee on September 12th. We are heading towards that moment where we're going to see a significant cyber impact that impacts our civilian critical infrastructure, just because that's the way that the world is changing. Civilian critical infrastructure is no longer off limits. And in many ways, every single one of us are operating on the front lines of a war that just hasn't been declared yet. That is just a truth that we have to live with, and it has to reshape our thinking and reshape the priorities that we have. For us, that means redoubling down on our hiring efforts and putting a lot of our money where where we're saying the priority really lies. That means redoubling our efforts to put staff back out in the field for us. With our cybersecurity advisors, our protective security advisors, our state cybersecurity coordinators, being able to interact with people on the ground and the communities they live with, and being able to engage as stakeholders in a significant way. It means initiatives like the ones we just launched within the last month or so, like CI Fortify, which is all about a focus on resilience and being able to operate in a disconnected manner, and being able to understand that there are essential services we deliver every single day that have to be able to withstand the disruptions that we know will come in 2027 and beyond through the targeting of our civilian critical infrastructure. We all need to be able to think through, how is it that I could operate without telecommunications infrastructure? How is it that I can operate without the data center that's dependent on water sector? How is it that I can operate, if we see a transportation sector disruption? We have to be able to riddle those things out and game those things out today, so we have a better understanding of the potential for cascading impacts amongst our space. Because again, the disruption will happen. We are going to see a mass scale disruptive event, and our public is exceedingly generous when it comes to restoration of services after a natural disaster. We see a wildfire happens, a major ice storm happens, a hurricane happens, a tornado affects a community. People are very, very understanding with saying everybody's doing the best they can. We can see the damage. We can see this thing. It was a God event. We have no idea. Nothing could have been done outside of shoring ourselves up and making us more resilient. Nothing could be done. We just have to give the linemen times to go out there and work on the lines. We have to give crews with chainsaws opportunity to go clear roads. We have to give, after a massive snowstorm, give the airport time to be able to clear the runways to restore a safe operation and get a much de-icer out there on the craft. They are not going to have the same level of forgiveness for our community. Then nobody is going to look at us and say, it's fine, I completely understand. You computery folks didn't know that this could have happened, and it's a nation state actor, and that sounds really bad and it sounds really serious. We're going to be totally forgiving of the fact that nobody could log onto Amazon for 24 hours, and I couldn't get my monster delivered to the house within 48 hours of me clicking order, because my body will physically fall apart at this point if I don't. We're just not going to have that same level of forgiveness, and that's just for the small things. We've seen it recently when we look at cyber incidents that weren't even cyber incidents, things that were just IT disruptions, like our Cloudflare outage recently. We see the Verizon outage that happened recently. That had a real tangible impact on people. That had people wondering, how am I going to contact my kids? Because I use a particular app that tracks the location for a family. That's how we coordinate pickup. We're all on Verizon. We've all got the same mobile plan. I need to be able to text them to coordinate, who's picking them up after practice. I need to be able to pay a bill. I need to be able to contact a caregiver who's staying at home with my parents because I'm at work during the day. There were just real significant impacts that happen with just things that are a couple hours of disruption for an IT event, not even a cyber event. Again, the American public will not forgive us for not being resilient enough. So for us, I think that leads us to just ruthless prioritization of what is most critically important. And for CISA, we've taken that opportunity to coordinate with our interagency friends, with our industry friends, around lines of effort supporting public health and safety, continuity of our nation's economy, national security, and defense critical infrastructure. Trying to get a good idea of, that's our blue space view. What is it that we think is most important? How do we align those things to the functions they provide for that are most important? And then aligning that, layering in a red space view as well, of going back with the last 5 or 6 years of subcompartment reporting, working with our interagency colleagues, and getting a good understanding of where's the adversary spending its time. You know, we know what we think is important. Do they think that that same company is important, or that same asset or that same function is important? Where are they spending their R&D time? Where are they spending their dwell time? Where are they pre-positioning on infrastructure? And that gives us a good picture of, this is maybe where we should start for purposes of developing joint work plans with each one of those entities to get to a measurable level of resilience at an asset-based level. Because my critique on the way that we've done some of this in the past on the government side is we've looked at somebody and said, you know, congratulations, you know, Lucien LLC is the most important energy company that is out there. Lucien, good luck, go with God, please make yourself more secure. That is not helpful. You know, we instead need to be able to say, here you are, important company. This is the function you're providing support for. Maybe it's a military installation, maybe it's a hospital, maybe it's a data center that's providing for a lot of credit card, you know, processing, you know, data, you know, whatever it might be. Here's the function you specifically support. Now let's have a conversation about which assets, you know, what are your real crown jewels and what are the specific assets that support that? And how can we have an integrated conversation about all the elements of our critical infrastructure providers that support those essential functions at an asset-based level? When we start doing that, that gets us to an actual tangible attack surface that we can manage in a realistic and reasonable way, and we can make some real investments around, whether that is state and local cyber grant program, whether it's industry investments themselves, whether it's looking at that capital improvement cycle that companies have to work within, or the people that need to go to public utility commissions or state corporation commissions because they're regulated entities to be able to get a rate adjustment, whatever it might be. That gives us something tangible, not just, oh my gosh, I'm an important company, I need to secure everything everywhere all the time. But that also gets us to a point where we have to be able to address the opposite and say, maybe I am a major financial institution. I might need to build in a little bit of customer resilience over the long term to being able to tolerate some of these disruptions, and saying that bank location that you always go to cash your check because you're getting a hard copy check and you just don't like using the mobile app, that bank location may be down for a couple of weeks. That ATM that you use may be down for a couple of weeks, and that's okay. Your money is still there. Your money is still secure. There are alternate means. It might be more inconvenient for you to go one town over to our other, you know, branch location, but that's okay. We as a society expect a high degree of availability, though. And again, some of that is just larger mental shifts that we're going to have to engage in as a broader community, in particular for elements like the transportation sector. You know, there is zero tolerance right now for transportation disruptions, none whatsoever. And it's not just limited to aviation. It's our maritime subsector, same exact thing. You know, we saw how it played out during COVID when we started to see disruptions at port locations. We started to see disruption of movement of goods. We started to see disruptions on the capacity that we could have for passengers moving back and forth. It doesn't matter. There is zero tolerance right now for those disruptions. So we have to start, you know, having a really hard conversation about where can we put our resources in the smartest way possible to really buy down some risk. And that doesn't mean buying a new shiny product. You know, it doesn't mean having more broadly available awareness training. It means making some really tough decisions right now that are going to make us all exceedingly uncomfortable for the next decade plus, while we're having a larger critical infrastructure resilience conversation in this country. So I know that we're going to do some questions as well, and I'm going to ramble an awful lot because somebody's going to give me an opening to ramble about things I want to. So I'm going to pause really quickly, and we'll start doing some of the questions. And otherwise, I'm just going to keep dragging us down a rabbit hole of, here is our deep dark hole of critical infrastructure.
Sure, hold on.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation and your comments. Sounds like you take the mission extremely seriously, and you went into a lot of detail about how that mission needs to be accomplished. But you are a successor to a CISA director who was vilified for telling the truth about election security. You're part of a cabinet department that has a bad reputation right now for other reasons. And you're part of an administration that a year ago took a chainsaw to effective government services. So my question is, how are you going to accomplish that mission in that environment?
Yeah, so I think we've got a tremendous amount of support for CISA and its mission right now. I mean, I think if you look at President Trump's national cybersecurity strategy, every element short of cost imposition that leads to offensive action is a CISA mission area. You know, whether it is securing critical and emerging technology, whether it is looking at opportunities for securing and modernizing federal networks or critical infrastructure partners, the workforce investments that we're making. And, you know, Secretary Mullen has been highly supportive of CISA and its mission, has been very engaged, whether it's just been in general threat briefings or engagement with our critical infrastructure partners. And for us, for anybody who's willing to come over here and work in the CISA mission, we've got 329 vacancies we're hiring against right now, with a goal of being able to get to 180 tentative job offers, which for those of you who've gone through the federal stuff before, that means everything short of you getting your security clearance in the door and going and doing your fun drug tests. You know, we've got a goal of having 180 of those issued by the end of this month. So we are rapidly moving forward to build CISA back into the organization that we know that it needs to be, and be able to meet those mission gaps that are present within the environment right now. We've tried to focus that first and foremost on our operational divisions, like our cybersecurity division, our infrastructure security division, you know, those programs that we have that touch a lot of this community and provide a lot of those services. And of course, our field forces, you know, our folks that are operating out in the field that I mentioned earlier, our cybersecurity advisors, our protective security advisors, our state cybersecurity coordinators, that are really the face, the operational face of the agency. You know, they're the ones that when the rubber meets the road and we start talking about vulnerability assessments, and we start talking about tabletop exercises in communities and engagements directly with those owner operators, engagements with state and local governments, you know, they're really where a lot of that happens. I think we've got a tremendous amount of support for that. And I think we've got a tremendous amount of bipartisan support to be able to continue to push those things forward. But it's not, you asked the question about CISA, and I think it's a broader question than just CISA. You know, CISA has a lot of different roles that we fulfill. You know, we're the nation's civilian cyber defense agency. We're the national coordinator for critical infrastructure security and resilience. We're the, you know, the nation's risk advisor. And for a lot of us, I think where we've made a mistake in the past is looking at it and saying, here's a specific problem set. CISA, you're the cyber folks or the critical infrastructure folks, you go solve it. That's never what CISA was intended to be. You know, we're not intended to be the absolutely everything to everyone all the time agency. When we start looking at that national coordinator role, that might mean me going and looking over at energy and saying, Department of Energy, I need you to come in, and here's where we can use your unique authority or your great relationship that you've got, or FBI or NSA or EPA or Department of Transportation or FAA or whomever it might be. It really is about being the unifier to be able to leverage all of the US government's resources and all of our authority to be able to accomplish a mission. I think that's going to be a significant focus for us going forward.
Okay.
I have a very easy and a simple question for you. As the acting CISA director, what is your plan to implement the OMB AIM 2107? The deadline already passed almost a year now, and which has direct impact to the national cybersecurity in general and the OT security as well.
So you're gonna have to remind me, because I'm not good with numbers. Which one's the
That's
21?
the OMB memo directing all federal agencies to implement IPv6 only policy. The deadline was 80%, minimum 80% last September.
Yeah, it's, you know, the interesting thing. I'm going to answer your question, but I'm answering it a little bit more broadly because I told y'all were going to give me an opportunity to ramble, so I'm going to ramble. Yeah, one of the interesting things, because I used to be at OMB and I was in the federal CIO's office where we were doing things like these MMOs going out. And for those of you that have happy lives and don't know what that is, oh, OMB is divided essentially into two halves. There's the B side, deals with the budget, run by PADS, and they own the budget books that go as the president's budget request to the Hill. Then there's the M side, and that is like everything else. So that's where your Office of Federal Procurement Policy sits, and your Office of the Federal CIO, and all of the sort of C-level functions that we think about across government. And OFCIO helps to coordinate things like technical direction, like the IPv4 to IPv6 transition, which are then largely just ignored by the federal interagency. That V4 to V6 transition was one of the first ones that I had the opportunity to get briefed on when I went to OMB. And I was, my first question was, wait, how old is the guidance that said you need to start making a V4 to V6 transition? And we just don't necessarily do a great job of making sure that these management direction memos are then reflected in people's budget priorities, which that is the actual reflection of priorities, reflected in their budget, and then they actually affect the change. So I think for us, much more broadly than just the V6 transition, we are getting a lot more hands-on and a lot more tactical with our federal agency partners on the types of technology transition they should be making, which is the reason why we had to issue another BOD recently, I want to say it was last fall, on like end of life, end of service, edge device risk, to be able to essentially get a little bit more prescriptive and say, okay, you CIOs and executive departments and agencies, you manage your own risk, you operate your own IT environments, but you are making risk decisions which are no longer okay for the wider federal enterprise. So we're getting a little bit more prescriptive in that way and saying, no, you can't run these end-of-life edge devices at the edge. And I think V6 transition and V6 first is going to be a big part of that. And Greg Barbaccia, the federal CIO, is doing a tremendous amount of work in that way as well, and really trying to operationalize the federal CIO Council and the federal CISO Council to get them out of just being a policy-focused organization and sort of a let's talk about it for a year and build some consensus organization to a real tactical set of implementers on some of those elements.
Maybe a new member is in place.
Don't tell me we need more new memos. No, now you're trying to make me sad.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you for making the time to come out and talk with us today. Really appreciate it.
Hello. Oh,
I just need to speak up, right? Sir, thank you again for making time to come out and talk with us today. I really appreciate it. I've seen the reporting from yourself on the 329 priority hires. I've also seen the Secretary Mullen number of 600. And thank you for sharing, the time frame of 100 plus so of those in the next short amount of time. Interested in hearing your thoughts on the strategy for that, and if government civilian hires aren't getting you where you need to be, any thoughts on opening the apertures to FFRDCs, to UARCs, maybe into contractor personnel? Over.
Yeah, thanks. I think for us, we're going to continue. Okay, I'm going to complain first before I actually answer your question. It's really hard for us to do anything involving either a contract strategy that involves just traditional services contractors or FFRDCs or UARCs or anything else out there when we don't actually get a budget from the Hill. That makes it exceptionally hard when I've got less than half a fiscal year to be able to go out and spend a multi-billion-dollar agency budget in a responsible way. Not to mention just sort of the compounding impact that happens there, where we're looking at contracts that are expiring, that because some of it's not accepted activity, we can't go and reward some of those contracts during the period of a shutdown. And we've got an awful lot of lapses that are out there. And then we've got a lot of, especially small to mid-sized contractors that are negatively affected in a significant way during the period of a shutdown, because they can keep invoicing all they want to. But the people that actually process the invoices and pay them, so they aren't continuing to have to go dig into lines of credit and accrue interest and everything else, they're not accepted. So nobody's there to pay the invoice. So we've got an awful lot of cleanup to do on that side. But yes, we're going to continue to, leverage to the best of our ability our FFRDC and UARC friends and our contracting friends to be able to make sure that they're in the mix. That provides, there's just a good sort of resource mix of when is it great to be able to hire a Fed? When do we need some more rapid application of, inside the loop of federal hiring where we can use, contracted support? And in a lot of places, like where is some of that niche expertise that we need to take advantage of that is not necessarily going to lend itself to coming in and solving the problem as a Fed, or it's not an ideal environment for that person to leave wherever they're at to go to use federal support.
Yeah, sorry.
Hello, thank you for being here today, answering our questions. A question on, you were getting to the point where you said CISA is going to move towards a more prescriptive approach going forward, perhaps maybe closer to an FCC type airworthiness, type of federal FAA airworthiness directive. Looking at Europe, they have created the Cyber Resilience Act, CRA. And in that case, they've taken put some teeth into legislation that says if you do not do these things, you will be fined X dollars per item per day. And I've often asked the question of government officials, do you see that as applicable in the US? Do you see any kind of thinking around those lines? Or perhaps in the US, there may be more of a market approach that says, rather than the stick, there may be a carrot out there that says, if you comply with our critical directives, there may be tax incentives or other incentives for companies that are able to do that. What are your thoughts on that, and where do you see that going?
Yeah, I think we've got a couple of different communities of interest that we pulled together, in particular with our OEM friends, and we always get a tremendous amount of support from them when we start talking about things like secure by design concepts, or do we need to have things like SBOMs and the like, and how do we generate longer term resilience within the supply chain? But I think that only gets after part of the problem, because I can have OEMs that build equipment all day long as secure as they want to. If they hand it to some person in the middle as an integrator who is then not integrating it in the right way or not implementing it in the right way, or we've got somebody who's trying to do site acceptance testing on it, and they're like, yeah, that's cute that they want the alarms configured that way. We configure them this way. This is our operational procedure. This is how we run things. Then it's not gonna matter. So for some of it, I think it's yes, I think the OEM part of conversation is part of it. Do I think that we're going to take a much more significant regulatory approach like our EU colleagues have? I don't see that on the horizon. We've got a couple of new initiatives that we're getting ready to roll out within the next week on how we focus on industry collaboration and how we bring these stakeholder groups together. So again, second plug for it. Keep your eyes peeled to CISA.gov. Lots and lots of cool stuff comes out on there, and you don't have to look at my picture at all. So we've got some ways that we're going to be bringing in the OEM community in sort of a focused conversation there. One of my critiques on the way that we did business in the past was we would have things like our IT sector coordinating council, and that kind of became the catch-all everything council. We're going to talk about OT. Now, closest thing we can get to is the IT. So go jam it into the IT conversation. We're going to talk about subsea cables. Seems IT-ish. Maybe it's comms. Let's just go jam it in there. Trying to take a little bit more of a nuanced approach to saying, this is a specific conversation we need to have with a specific set of stakeholders. Let's pull them together for a conversation, to hear from them about what we can be doing to help set the right conditions for them to be successful in the environment. There's just some like real world operational challenges that we have to be able to meet, like things like warranty visibility and support is a good example. If we are saying we are on the front lines of a war that has not yet been declared, you need to be able to operate in a disconnected way and potentially, in a denied communications way. I need you, essential services provider, to think about how you would operate without telecommunications connectivity. Well, that's great. Right until the point that you realize that OEM ABC over here has a contractual stipulation that says you have to maintain your connectivity to me 100% of the time, all the time. Otherwise, it's going to invalidate your warranty if you're going to continue to operate. So we've just got some hard challenges we've got to be able to work through that aren't even just the technical challenges, but start to get to the business model challenges within the OEM community and what that actually means for owner operators in a significant way. But I think first and foremost, we want to be able to partner in a way that is going to be logical and straightforward and is going to ease the burden wherever possible on the owner operators to not to have SME level technical expertise in every single product and product type that they are operating in order to be able to operate in a secure way.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here and for your comments. Really appreciate it. Just rather than questions, actually two requests of you and CISA specifically. And the first one is prioritize the timely sharing of actionable intelligence information. There have been times in the past where CISA may have information, but refuse to utilize one-time read-ins, which is something that your predecessor NPPD used to do. And then secondly, encourage CISA to serve in a coordinating role, because airports have a myriad of federal requirements imposed by various agencies as it pertains to cyber. And there's very little coordination. I was even told by a department representative not too long ago that they have a challenge keeping all the requirements straight. So that would be really helpful, particularly when you have certain requirements that are imposed on airports that are very resource intensive, but do very little to mitigate risk, right? So there were requirements that came out not too long ago that said, okay, airports, identify your critical systems and then implement mitigation measures. Great initiative, clearly performance-based, but then the agency turned right around and said, no, 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 no. The systems you identified as critical are not critical. These are the systems that are critical. Well, who better than an airport to know what their critical systems are? So just appreciate your help in that regard.
Well, yeah, a government bureaucrat, obviously. I mean, we're all knowing. I don't need owner operator input. I mean, come on. So yeah, your point's well taken. Yeah, we have a couple thousand people in the both the state and local and industry clearance program that we maintain at CISA, and our sector-based colleagues and some of our law enforcement colleagues and others also have a tremendous amount of clearances that they hold for people. But that's really just the first step. So where we've tried to take a little bit of a different approach the last couple of months is, again, like focused conversations with stakeholders with a focused amount of actionable intelligence to be able to say, here is specifically what we're seeing, and here's how it pertains specifically to your sector or subsector. You tell us, what do you think this means to you? Now that process takes a little bit longer than we'd like, just because of, if I've got an interagency partner, within the IC, they're the originating control. We got to get it down to a tear line where they're comfortable with it. We got to make sure sometimes that we have reps from those agencies in the room. There's hurdles to jump through. But we're continuing to try to jump through them. And the way that we're trying to tackle that up front is, again, those like focused conversations with smaller sets of stakeholders to specifically present them with, here's the intel and what we see the adversary doing and maneuvering within the space. So all great points. And if you're willing to narc on who that department person was that you talked to, I'll make sure they're appropriately educated on all the different requirements. But it really has been fantastic. So I've just been able to travel post shutdown the last couple of months and being able to go see our folks that are out in the regions, because CISA has 10 different regions, each one's led by a regional director. Being able post shutdown to be able to go out and actually see some of those folks and see, again, the tremendous relationships that they have. One of my recent ones was going up to our Region 1 office and being able to go see the relationship that they've got with Massport, there at Logan, and being able to see just how are they actioning things that are coming in partnership with the federal government, and B, what does that actually mean in practice for their operation, and where can we reduce some of that friction. And I think the harmonization of the approach that we take, whether it's in regulatory matters or it's just in again, how do we operationalize this and make it relevant, being able to make that as frictionless as possible to be able to, again, get our intel and get our operations focused back out in the field where those relationships actually, that's where the rubber hits meets the road. That's what's so critically important for us right now.
Good. We have a couple questions from our online folks, if you don't mind. You mentioned that a mass scale disruptive event will happen. Is that a 100% probability?
I don't think anything's ever a
Right, I
100%
know.
probability. But yeah, I mean, look, it's just, I think this is naturally where we start to see things going. We've seen the evolution of warfare. We've seen the evolution of something, you know, our cyber threat landscape. We've seen the evolution of just the amount of infrastructure we have that is digitally interconnected at this point. I think the natural conclusion we have to come to is whether it is through a malicious cyber actor or it is through an IT event, again, like the examples I gave earlier, we are going to see mass disruptive events that will continue. And a lot of our critical infrastructure is the equivalent of crumbling roads and bridges around this country right now. So we've got to be able to make significant investments both on the infrastructure side and the security side to be able to limit the potential for that future poly crisis.
I'll do one more question online and go back to the audience. Oh, Lucian, you want to? Okay.
No, nothing from Lucian.
From CISA's perspective, which currently presents the greater systemic risk to critical infrastructure, traditional IT environments or operational technology environments? How do you see that balance changing over the next few years as OT and IT continue to converge?
I don't think it's necessarily about, you know, which one has the greater risk. I think in my mind, it's about focusing on the consequence. And not that there's less consequence necessarily for trying to weigh things out, you know, directly and saying which one's more. I think if we start to look at our OT though, again, we as a society do not have psychological resilience to the disruptions that OT would present. You know, we just don't. You know, if we start telling people, I'm sorry, there's a big cyber incident going on, you're not going to have access to water. That is going to be immensely impactful, both on the technical side as well as on the psychological side. So I think for me, it's more about the focus on the consequence of those environments. Because again, all IT environments aren't created equal, just like all OT environments aren't created equal. So again, I think it's getting to what is the specific function that those assets present, and then being able to get a better picture of consequence based on that.
Okay, great. Lucian?
So first of all, Director Andersen, appreciate your time coming up here. Absolutely fantastic, and being candid and forthright with a whole range of questions. Obviously, you're focused on the mission, which I think is refreshing to see what we need to get done as a nation. We've been focused a lot on cyber, but you have a whole other realm of responsibilities to deal with physical security for infrastructure as well. We're going to talk tomorrow a little bit about the kinetic threat to the airports, particularly from drones. And I think we've had a wake-up call in the country, even on the military side, when you've got drones parked over, you know, Barksdale Air Force Base for 4 days, shutting down a strategic base. What can we work with you on ultimately on the physical security side as far as technologies? I know we've got a task force that's been built up in DOW. Do you want to take advantage of that task force? I mean, what can we start looking for civilian, airfield, kinetic protection, particularly from drone threat?
Yeah, and thank you for the tee up. I didn't have to pay Lucian to do that. You know, people do tend to think about CISA as, you know, as cyber and cyber first, and there is an awful lot of cyber work that we do. But we also have a tremendous amount of physical security work that we do in emergency communications resiliency and working with statewide interoperability coordinators and, you know, everything from counter drone, counter UAS programs, which we've got a fantastic program manager sitting right there inside of our infrastructure security division named Mary. I'm sure she'd be happy to be plugged right in with that. Or we've got our Office of Bombing Prevention that's doing everything from security assessments in the lead up to FIFA and our work that we're doing, you know, all of our regions, where we're seeing both the matches being played and we're seeing, you know, these team base camp locations are all plugged in with federal coordination teams, you know, where our team members are providing, again, not just cyber expertise, but they're providing a lot of that physical security and kinetic threat expertise as well. So near-term plug, which I'm sure absolutely nobody in this audience is tracking on, is you know, that FAA notice of proposed rulemaking that's out there, and the you know, the feedback that they're looking for on you know, flight restrictions regarding critical infrastructure and those designations. So if you have not taken the opportunity to providing input on that notice of proposed rulemaking right now while it's open for public comment, is fantastic to be able to make sure that our FAA colleagues hear from the broadest set of stakeholders possible as they look to formulate that approach in the future.
Okay, great. We have a question here.
So Thank you very much for your openness and transparency, echoing the other gentleman's comments. So AI, moving very, very fast.
I was this close to getting out of here with that AI question. That's
You knew you were going to get one, right? What's the, first of all, critical infrastructure? Yes, no, maybe.
Is AI critical infrastructure? Is that your question?
Yes, no, maybe.
No, no. I think the things that go into it and make it work are probably critical infrastructure, like our communications infrastructure, the data centers. When we look at IT critical infrastructure, I think it is an output. I think it is something that is generated and derived from things that critical infrastructure support and provide, which maybe is a distinction without a difference, but in my mind, at least, it makes sense.
So no AI sector coming anytime soon.
Well, I don't know. We've got
Because the government seems to be poking around a lot day to day, hour to hour in AI. I just asking for a friend.
yeah, I don't. It's
A couple of them actually. Claude and
yeah. Do I know that we'll see an AI sector? I don't know. Do I think that we're going to see a lot more coordination in a formalized way with Frontier Labs and others? Yes. And if you look at the National AI Action Plan, there's some specific tasking to DHS and CISA there for things like building up an AI ISAC and a couple of other things. So ISAC is not a sector coordinating council or a sector designation by any means, but it is a recognition that there is a community of people that we need to be interacting with in a very focused way on threats that are specific to that environment. Because I think it's both. It's how do we secure from adversarial AI? How do we secure our AI? And then it's how do we use AI to help secure ourselves? So it's like there's three different, very, very broad buckets that I'm sure people could argue about the degree of fidelity and detail, within each one of them. But I think there's several different lines of effort that are going to require a high degree of industry collaboration for us to be successful in any of them.
okay, so now the new boss calls you up and says, you've got to pull an all-nighter. Everything got squared away on Capitol Hill. We've got some money. Boss wants you to come down to the White House tomorrow and give Nick's executive order. They're going to approve your executive order. What's that executive order look like?
Well, for me, again, it's going to be all about our ruthless prioritization on critical infrastructure. It's going to be about getting down to that asset level discussion of critical infrastructure protection and resilience. I think there's a lot of unanswered questions that are out there right now, and just to be honest, there's a ton of federal resources and federal programs that aren't just being fully taken advantage of today. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of grant dollars. I mean, just looking at grant dollars that go out the door from the federal government every single year, but it's all based on the perspective of, if I use like state and local cyber grant program as an example, a single state administrative agent that has a single perspective about what they're trying to do to best secure their state. And you start looking at some of the FEMA reports that come out every year, there's a big disconnect between like cyber and critical infrastructure resilience and where those dollars are actually flowing for overall, grant dollars. They're still flowing to things that are traditional all hazards approaches. Like I'm from South Carolina. South Carolina spends an awful lot of money on things like hurricane resilience. If I'm trying to look at it, yes, like that is a thing they need to continue to do. They also need to be able to make a shift towards cyber and critical infrastructure based resilience more broadly. We're just not seeing that flow right now. So for me, if there's another magic executive order that's coming down, it's going to focus on how are we going to have that concerted effort just to where we can help clean up some of the lines on that critical infrastructure prioritization, because we're doing it right now. We've got a specific DOW focus group just on DCI, where we're working with DOW and we're working with our private sector owner operator friends on some specific DCI pilots. Then we've also got a larger Homeland Defense working group that we stood up that's focusing on all those other elements that I mentioned as well. Broader national security, public health and safety, continuity of the economy, and the like. So that getting down to that prioritization and how are we driving, being able to pull all levers of national power in order to affect that change. That is Nick's magic executive order.
Thanks.
Okay, back here.
Hi, thank you so much for your talks. This is the second time in less than a week I'm listening to your talks, and it's very interesting. You talked about AI not being the most frontier focus for critical infrastructure. I've been following DARPA. They've been working on or funding a project called Orlando. Stands for Optimized Reinforcement Learning Agents for Network Defense Operations. Those are like the agents are basically being built for critical infrastructure, water treatment facilities and stuff. So do you think CISA could also be on those front lines of funding, promoting at least AI implementation for efficient security, network security, and cybersecurity, implementations at least?
I'm going to start making people wear special buttons when they've heard me within the last week, so I don't use my same examples all over again. So I think, I think CISA is doing that right now. So I mean, we are both using AI to be able to assist our critical infrastructure owner operator friends, and we are examining artificial intelligence risk and what that means for people as they're sort of implementing new builds within this environment. But I haven't heard of Orlando. That's a new one. That's a new one for me. I can't keep up with all these DARPA projects. DARPA has so many different offices. They're working on so many different things, and they're making a lot of progress really quickly. So yeah, I think we're happy to be plugged into any of them, because first and foremost, I don't want to waste time spending CISA dollars on something that somebody else is already building. And that's that Homeland Defense Working Group that I made reference to a moment ago. That's really what that's all about. That's about us looking at it and saying, yeah, I might be the telecommunications sector risk management agency, but I've got a friend over here in the interagency that has a much better relationship with this particular company that has these particular assets. We're going to defer and let them take the lead in that. It's really just all about who's best positioned, who has the right assets, and who has the right tools at their fingertips in order to be able to lead whatever segment of that engagement it is. But Orlando's a new one I'll have to look at.
Okay, maybe a couple more questions. I know we're going a little bit over, but, oh, is it you? I'm sorry. Okay.
Good afternoon, sir. It's a pleasure to talk to you this afternoon. So speaking to the scale and the likelihood of cyber threats in the future, do you see the Army and Air National Guards playing a bigger role when it comes to defending critical infrastructure on the civilian side?
Oh, yeah. I promise I was not paying people to sit in the audience and ask me cool questions. Yeah, so since we're in Maryland, I'll use Maryland as an example. The director of the Joint Staff here in Maryland, general officer level role, has actually been a fantastic partner for us, and being able to have some of those conversations, just as a single example. But in my mind, again, when we look at CISA is meant to be that national coordinator. So for us, it doesn't matter if I had 100,000 person CISA army at my disposal. We're never going to have the amount of resources to be able to respond to every cyber incident around the country. So for us, it's about being able to look at both our National Guard friends and what are the resources they can bring to the fight, and also starting to look at a lot of the cyber civil defense organizations that are starting to spin up a lot of these like cyber clinics and such in local communities, and trying to get a good understanding of what can they bring into the fight, so that when we look across the board overall, we can look at it and say, it's a really bad day. Guess what? Cyber Command's not coming. Cyber Command is going to get tasked for national level tasking, and they're going to be off doing what they need to do to make sure that this country can project power and be able to respond back kinetically if needed. They're going to have some DOW level tasking. And we just have to be able to operate with that as a recognition that we need to be able to look across the board and say, here's our Cyber Command footprint of what's available. Here's our FBI CAT teams and what's available. Here are our CISA, teams, regionally and nationally, and what's available. And here are our local assets, even if it's volunteer based, to be able to understand what's available and what can they actually do. What do they have the capacity and the capability to be able to deliver, so we can just link people up with the right resources to try to help achieve restoration as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Yeah, last one. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Thanks very much for coming, Nick, today, and thanks for your leadership. So I'm the guy that goes every place and asks about routers. So the FCC has banned foreign routers because they're a national security risk. Rob Joyce has testified to Congress repeatedly about this risk of tens of millions of Trojan horses put into our factories and infrastructure. So rather than asking the same question, I have a different one. Shouldn't we consider routers to be critical infrastructure or networking gear?
No, I really don't think so. It's, and again, this is where I'll get back to maybe distinction without a difference. But in my mind, that's a part. It's a really, really important part, but it's a part. It's a part, it's a part and it's a piece of equipment, just like, PLCs are or anything else. I wouldn't turn around and say, well, we've seen very clearly, and CISA's put out this alerting saying that, the Iranians were targeting internet accessible PLCs that were unsecured and open on the internet. PLC should be critical infrastructure. Now, I still think we've got to be able to take that. Here's the function that's being performed. Here's the sector that's performing it, rather than looking at it and saying this individual piece, part, or manufactured piece of equipment is critical infrastructure itself. But it does mean that we need to be able to treat it like the important interconnected element that it is across many different sectors. And that means secure by design. That means greater visibility into the supply chain. That means greater awareness about the risk that is placed within the supply chain, in particular from adversarial aligned, countries where we have that presence within our supply chain. And it means that, generating additional owner operator education on how to best secure them, how to best use them.
Thank you.
All right. I think that's all of our time and a little bit over. So I want to thank you so much, Mr. Andersen, for your time and for these great questions.